What's up, chat? It's Thursday, which is why we're doing a Warhamster Wednesday today. A normal thing to do that we do all the time. We did get hit with a bunch of new releases, kind of out of the blue yesterday, so that ended up being my whole day. We had a game to stream over on Twitch. We streamed an Ultramarines game using the new Victrix Honor Guard over on Twitch, and obviously we talked about all the new Ultramarine and all of that other stuff. What's the other stuff? Tau and Space Wolves and things like that. Pretty crazy time. I think Ultramarines are about to, be thrust back into the spotlight in terms of the metagame. The other stuff maybe not quite as exciting, but it was pretty cool. And yeah, we're back to Warhamster Wednesday, and the hamster has been busy this week. We have lots of interesting things to talk about, lots of fair play questions in more ways than one. Welcome in, everyone. I'm hiding in my dark bunker. Yeah, I'm doing a new lighting thing. I don't know. We're gonna see how it goes. I think it's a little too dark. I probably need some lights somewhere else. But also my little studio is like super cluttered right now because I got all my new parts for my new streaming PC. Thank you for everybody who donated to the GoFundMe. I really appreciate it. I have I have one event scheduled for next weekend. I'll be at the Standoff GT. And then it looks like I might have an event 2 weeks after that in Massachusetts. So we'll have lots of use out of that machine as soon as I put it together, which I will have to do. We got it like live on stream last night is when we got it. I do want to give another shout out as well, real quick. I'm going to do a personal plug here. Absolutely. What's the word? Just totally self-indulgent. I released on Breachstorm, I released a short story that I wrote. If you want to read some fiction for Breachstorm, go check that out. We got more fiction coming over there. As breachstorm.com/blog has the info. That's a little bit of narrative to that game. That's neither here nor there. I'm going to give a shout out to it just because it's something cool that I did and I want to show people. So that's 100% what's going on there. And without further ado, let's dive in and talk about the light helps a lot. Oh, if I have like the bright screen on, interesting. I did have it. I had my notes sheet on bright mode, and it was like really bright. Is that better? We could do that. Actually, that doesn't look too bad. That's probably fine. I think that's probably much better. It depends on which window I'm looking at, I guess, on my second screen here. Whatever. We're going to go with this, and then we're going to call it a day. There we go. I do need some more lighting equipment, though, I think is what I'm learning today. But that's all right. Let's talk about some of the things that the Warhamster has brought. It was kind of funny because, like, obviously there's a big topic we want to talk about today. We'll get to that in a little bit here, but I have some other sort of tangential things to discuss. And I was like, oh, let's see if we can find any topics to talk about. And there were like 4 of them that were posted like the other day. I was like, okay, well, I guess this is the internet's making my job really easy. We've got an interesting question, Chance, about Gotcha Hammer from Itchy Skin 6533. Might want to get that looked at, my guy. I think that might be a dermatology question there. I don't know if this is one for Warhammer community, but either case, heroic intervention. You're asking a community. I'm interested to see what people think about this particular question. Basically, asking what the etiquette is on declaring heroic interventions. I let my opponent declare a charge and roll. Once the roll is done, I decide to heroic, then help them avoid the heroic. I think that's probably, I guess that's pretty reasonable. I think you don't have to heroic upon the roll being made, though. You can say, hey, watch out for my heroic, and I think you could go here to not do it. Then you can decide whether or not you're heroic. Sometimes it's not possible, but then you do the heroic and you do whatever. It definitely seems like that's basically what they're talking about here, which I think is totally correct. Opponent saying, or player saying, am I playing Gotcha Hammer? I've had an opponent get upset recently. Wanted to know where the majority feel on it. If they get upset because you heroic them and they rolled too high to get out of the heroic, hate the game, not the player, my dude. That is a problem, in my opinion. With 10th edition Warhammer 40k, I don't like the heroic intervention mechanic. I think that it punishes high rolls on charges too much. And it can totally disrupt a game without either player's control, right? I box card a charge. That means my entire unit must base you. Now you can heroic with whatever you want instead of me being able to position around it. That sucks. That sucks and is bad, and I don't like that. I understand a player being upset about that, but I don't think you can be upset about upset to your opponent where you're like, oh no, I'm charging too far. I've rolled too high and I can't get out of this interruption. You correctly using your abilities is not poor sportsmanship. That's just the way the game is played. And unfortunately, because there's so much hidden information that's hidden inside the variants of the game, before that charge occurs, there's basically nothing that either player can do to disrupt that interaction as it happens, right? The only thing that you could potentially do is try to space your charge a little bit harder, or give yourself a position where you can only, like, you have one model close and the rest of your unit farther back, which gives you more control over your charge, but you can never position perfectly around bad dice rolls, right? If you have positioned perfectly to make your charge almost automatically in, however, you have a lot of control over where they go, assuming that you roll an average amount on the dice, right? Average of roll on 2 dice is a 7. We position around a 7-inch charge, maybe a 6-inch charge, maybe an 8-inch charge, and then you roll a boxcars and you're like, well, fuck me, I guess. There's very little you can do in some of those cases, and positioning around it sometimes means that if you roll a low charge but still make it in, you don't even get to swing with your whole unit. It's a very bad mechanic, but one player utilizing it and the other player unfortunately being on the receiving end of it is not their fault. That's just how the mechanic works. So I think this person, I feel like, has the utmost... I have the respect for the question, I guess, because they are wondering sort of how you navigate a situation where the mechanics are actively fucking your opponent, and it feels pretty bad. Can we talk about the Votan turn 1 yield point interaction? We are going to talk about that one. That's my next on my list. So yes, good question, chat. It's similar to Overwatch, but different because no roll has happened. So I always let my opponent adjust their movement to minimize or avoid Overwatch. So first of all, I mean, that's kind of a missequence, right? I think that reminding your opponent about heroic intervention is sportsmanlike play, but I don't know. You definitely don't have to declare I'm gonna intervene if you can't stop me beforehand. That's I don't know. That feels strange to me. That feels a little bit like the discussion point topic we had previously, where like over explaining the board state to your opponent sometimes can have benefits to you. If you're like, oh, watch out for my Overwatch, this guy has a pistol flamer, and you just constantly are putting it in your opponent's brain. Like, I don't know if I like that. And constantly telling your opponent you're going to heroic intervention them feels a little bit like that. I don't know. That feels like over explaining, I guess, a little bit. But here's the thing. Sometimes this does happen, especially if you're playing somebody who, isn't super familiar with the fight phase, or isn't super familiar with what stuff you have. And a lot of times you'll find that you run in to a heroic intervention from something you didn't expect. So you can be like, oh, you can intervene me, that's fine. And your opponent's like, well, I have fight first, or I once bring in fight first, or my unit's super tanky, or, does impact mortals or something. And you don't know that when you're running into the heroic intervention. At that point, I'll be like, you sure want to put that model there? Because, like, could mess you up pretty bad if I intervene here. And then you can sort of work around it. And then sometimes they just roll too high and they have to base, and it's like a mess. But if they just declare, like, the worst heroic interventions I think I've seen is when somebody isn't really practiced in the game and they just declare like random charges. They're like, oh, I'm going to get this guy into your big tanky unit or whatever so I can punch it. And you're like, I mean, I've set up the lion next to them. So, like, you don't need to make this charge, and it's really bad for you if you do. And I've seen those like sort of turn an entire game on their head. That's a really weird one because, to some extent, like, it's all on the table, and you just need to play with a little bit more reserved in order not to get banged up by it. If a unit of 5 multi-charges 3 different units that are decently spread apart and roll high enough that each model can base to base one of the targets, can you choose not to base with a model to keep your unit in coherency? Yes. Yeah, so coherency basically beats every other charge requirement. So each time, so it's a weird situation. There's actually a situation in World Championships which might end up being a video. I'm not 100% sure. It's like kind of a weird situation. I don't know. Probably we might talk about it later. Otherwise, I won't really discuss it very much. Basically the unit constantly checks its own capacity to reach coherency. If at all times, your models, there is like the overarching charge mechanic requires all your models move towards one of the charge targets. That's always a requirement. However, each time you do so, the unit's constantly checking whether or not, while following that rule, they can reestablish coherency. If at any point you can't, your move is illegal. You bounce back to the start and you have to do it again. So if I pick up this model, I go, first model in the charge, I have to, I can base one of my charge targets. So I do. Boom. I look at the rest of the unit and I say, I haven't moved 4 of the 5 models. It is easy to reestablish coherency while moving towards a charge target because I haven't moved all the models in the unit. You pick up the next model, you go, I must base with this model because there's an enemy here. I will base with them. You look at the rest of the unit and you go, there's 3 out of 5 models still remaining. It is possible for me to reestablish coherency while moving towards my charge target, so we're good. You pick up the third model, you go, I must base with this model. You base another unit. You look back, there's 2 models left to move, and you say, I can still reestablish coherency because I have 2 models, even if the first 3 models have bounced all the way out of coherency. As long as I can reestablish coherency by putting the remaining 2 models in between them, we're good to go. And then you pick up the 4th model and you go, I can only reestablish coherency if this model moves to this specific point between 2 of the models that are already charged while moving towards a charge target, which means I must do that even if otherwise I could base. The requirement to retain coherency overrides the requirement to base. Which means in some cases, you can actually finagle that in weird ways. You can charge one model super far out. You can charge the rest of your unit far out to the other side. And when you get to the closest models to your opponent that would normally have to move the farthest forward to find new basing targets, you go, these models haven't moved yet. However, they are required to move to particular points on the battlefield in order to reestablish coherency. So you can do a weird coherency scam, basically, where you intentionally break your own coherency in order to prevent your models from having to base something. It doesn't come up super often, but occasionally it can, in order to restrict the downside or limit the downside of really big charges, really, really high charges where your unit would like explode out by accident and engage everyone. And you can do weird things by basically splitting your own coherency to require models to go and reestablish coherency. It's not a good mechanic, but essentially what you're saying is totally accurate. You can alleviate your requirement to base by intentionally breaking your own coherency by running your dudes all over the place to different charge targets. It's unfortunately, I think it's a really unintended interaction. It's like 10 levels deep into the Pepe Sylvia like weird pinboard of charge mechanics, but unfortunately, like the way that the charge rules work, it in some cases required because otherwise big dice rolls can really screw you. It's really not great. Is there a way to tell which rules override the other ones? It's just in the charge rules. I mean, we can read through the charge rules like if we want to for a sec here. Grab my rule book out. It just requires it requires just a deep reading of an in-depth reading of the charge rules. It's not like there's no like flow chart or anything. It just sort of explains how you do it. So if we go over to our thing, so you make a charge rule. You have to. So this is the weird part about charges. A lot of people don't know this. It's kind of a stupid rule. I mean, the charging is probably the worst mechanic in besides like True Line of Sight, I guess, which goes without saying. Charging is probably the least considered mechanic in 10th edition. It's really bad. This is probably the worst that like charging in the fight phase has been since I've been playing 40k, I think, for sure. And we'll talk about the reason why in a moment here, Chance. So you select a unit to declare a charge. You select one or more enemy units within 12 inches as the targets of the charge. Then you make a charge roll by rolling 2d6. The result is the number of inches each model in the unit can move if a charge move is possible. Not must, but can. Important to note. For a charge move to be possible, the charge roll must be sufficient to enable the charging unit to move within engagement range of every enemy unit that you selected without moving into engagement range of any other enemies and in unit coherency. So the unit coherency thing is important. You have to engage all enemies and you have to remain in unit coherency, right? That is called, it's not called anything. It's basically, that's an imaginary move that you make to determine whether or not a charge is possible. Then, if the charge is possible, so you can meet all those criteria, you then move them, and now the requirement to base comes into play. So the actual move that you make while charging can be different than the one that you conceptually make when trying to achieve a charge. Each model in the charging unit must end its move closer to one of the units selected as the target of the charge. Requirement number 1. Each time you move a unit, it must always end in coherency. That's in the coherency rules. And then if you can do so while base to basing an enemy model, you must do that. While satisfying all the conditions above. So in unit coherency. So the requirement to base is essentially the softest requirement from your charge move. The first requirement is that you move closer to the first requirement, is you move closer to the enemy. Second requirement is that you also must be in unit coherency while doing that. If those all things are possible and you can base, then you must. However, the weird thing is that it never says you actually have to engage your opponent. So it can create weird situations where, like, you declare multiple charge targets, but because of the basing restriction and your requirements to move to end in coherency, you actually end up not engaging one or more of your charge targets. It's pretty weird. It's poorly worded, honestly, chat. But that's basically how it works. So anyway, it's a whole thing. Maybe writing them into a flowchart would help. Yeah, I don't disagree. This is fine. I don't know why it's just a paragraph of text, but it is what it is. There's a little bit of an interesting discussion about charge rolls, chat. Do you have to base the closest model? You do not. You must move towards the target. So the distance between the charging model and the target must be closing as you move. However, the rule is just that if you base anything, you must. So most often at times it's the closest model. And sometimes what you want to do is move models in the front of your unit towards the closest enemy, because otherwise, if you moved them towards the end of that charge activation, you would be forced to move farther forward than the models in the back of your unit. So you oftentimes end up basing the closest thing just to make sure that you don't do things like run into heroic interventions like we're talking about right here. But it's not a requirement. You just must move towards them and base if you can, essentially. Yeah. Closest models for piling consolidate, 100%. Yeah, that's a good point out. Adhernism. Yeah, the other thing too is, like, it's not the same restrictions as piling in and consolidating, which also requires unit coherency, but then requires models to move towards the closest model and base if they can, not unit. It's like a whole thing. How can you charge and not engage the target? I don't know. Well, rules is written. You make a charge roll, determine whether or not that roll can move you into engagement, and then you move any distance you want towards the target. If you can base, you must. So 99.9% of the time, at least one of my models can base my charge target, so that they're going to do that because they have to. However, if you, like, for example, would move enough to engage but not enough to base, there's actually no requirement for your charge move to move into engagement range, which I think is an oversight, but it's been there for 3 years and they've never changed it. So, like, I don't know at this point. It's fucking dumb, man. It's very bad. I don't know. I think and the number of games you see that just get blown out because, like, somebody accidentally rolled too high or a weird number on a charge is just, like, stupid. Just let people move their models where they want. Make them move into engagement range and just let them move towards them. It doesn't matter all this fucking basing shit. I don't know. Makes me sad. Anyway, let's talk about what people think about heroic intervention. Oh man, somebody got, I don't know. I closed this thing. They didn't get downloaded. Would you call something like grenades or smoke a gotcha or Overwatch? Well, the difference is that those are not used. Grenades, at least, is used proactively. It's not used in response to somebody else doing stuff. Smoke, I guess, like it affects your dice rolls, but doesn't affect your like movement on the table. So I don't know. That feels like a false equivalence to me. You left out Overwatch. Almost forgot I'm allowed to consider overwatching. Being on the receiving end is just an ever-present fact of life. For sure. Yeah. Grenades is a gotcha to use. I never remember. Fair enough, I guess. How is a core stratagem a gotcha? Yeah, so the weird thing is like in these cases, right? The feel badsiest points of heroic intervention are the times where you didn't realize that a unit could intervene or could like engage, right? Like what you don't want to have happen is for someone to go, oh, you're 5.995 inches away from me after you charge, so I'm going to intervene. And you're like, well, clearly I was trying to say 6, but I bumped that guy. You know, like that's when you are playing Gotcha Hammer. And the difference between any of the core stratagems in Heroic Intervention is that Heroic Intervention, kind of like Overwatch, has that capacity to it. Whereas the other core stratagems are not they're either just defensive stuff or stuff that you use proactively on your own turn, which your opponent has no control over. But this one can be kind of disrupted by like mismeasuring or whatever. Command rerolls a gotcha. Oh, I didn't know you could command reroll that. How dare you? Ash Dude 42 over here, fucking based. A core strat not every army gets. Indeed. Grenades is crazy. Grenades is, I think, I mean, I don't know. We could complain about that. That's just not what we want. But grenades, I think, is it's the most powerful. It's such a powerful core stratagem that not giving it to more factions is wild. Absolutely crazy behavior. Because it's just 1 CP for 3 mortal wounds, generally speaking, right? And potentially 5. It's actually like 3.5, basically. Because you do spike up a lot. And you don't get punished for spiking down, right? You just do lower than average damage. So like realistically, you're doing you can never do negative damage. So you're averaging slightly higher than 3 generally. So like it's pretty crazy. And then like going from factions that don't have it, where you're just like burning your own command points on, or you're using your own stratagems, to going to factions that do have it, and you're like, in 80% of cases, I should be throwing 1 grenade a turn. I should set 5 command points aside to do grenades, because if you consider that, it's like spending 5 command points at the start of the game to destroy one of your opponent's tanks. And you're like, when you consider it that way, you're like, that's crazy. That's absolutely unhinged. What the fuck? I would probably do that. It would probably be a pretty reasonable stratagem to spend 5 CP and your opponent plays down a gladiator. They're just down 200 points, right? Regardless of their defensive profile. That's like crazy. Most of their armies would just lose if you did that to them, which is pretty wild. Play armies that have access to grenades, spend more than CP on average. Yeah. How's the average on 3? I think it's the same math as like, I get, maybe it's bell curve. I don't know. I'm not a math person, but I think it's similar to the rationale that like the average of a D6 roll is greater than 3, right? Because there's like an equal chance that you will roll either exactly 3 or above 3, right? So it ends up being 3.5, and I imagine that there's probably similar math to a grenade. Although I don't know if because it's like the result of 6 random individually random instances rather than 1. But I don't know. It only feels like it's more than 3. I think you expect 3, like 50% coin flips. But I think that you probably, if you were run a million simulations, it would be like 3.1 or something. Your opponent gets 5 mortal wounds, you get 1. Yeah, for sure. I could be wrong. But I think you, like I said, I think the expected result is 3. But I think you should always plan for your opponent to get more than 3 for sure. On a grenade. If an opponent thinks that a generic stratagem that is available to all factions is a gotcha, it's on them, not you. They need to learn. If the guy's a new player learning the ropes, I cut some slack. Getting belligerent over a basic mechanic of the game seems like a problem they need to fix themselves. I don't disagree with this. I do think that it's a weird situation because I think based on, like, if you compare Heroic Intervention or Overwatch, interrupt threats. Nurgle Matt, what's up, dude?
Nurgle Matthew donated $7.77
CP5,
super
remove
chat.
an enemy
Street
vehicle.
Name, melt a bomb.
Hell
CP
yeah,
cost.
dude.
5
Is there a
ability,
range requirement?
Remove a flipping enemy vehicle from play. And laugh about it.
Is there a range requirement from your units? You just get to do it. I mean, that'd be pretty good. Solve the Knights problem. Wholesale. A despoiler? Melt the bomb. You're dead. Get him out of here. No range anywhere on the board. Let's go. I don't even have to get an cursor up there to throw the grenade. Incredible. I'm very glad that they fixed the issues of grenades where you could advance and fall back and do it. That was absolutely disgusting. The number of times you saw people early in the edition where they were like, "I'll Gladius Task Force, Devastator Doctrine, run a scout squad, oath you, shoot you with the scout squad, like, grenade you, shoot with the scout squad to kill you," and you're like, I haven't done anything yet, man. And then this guy's just fucking blew my vehicle up. Please stop it. Or you run in, I don't know, intercessors or something, and they're just like, throw a grenade, charge you. You're like, please go away. I don't want this. Someone just an orbital strike, yeah, for sure. Anyway, chat. I think a lot of these arguments are sort of going around the clock here, or just going around the same. They're going in circles right now. I do think that same with Overwatch. There's probably there's a little bit of a requirement to like remind your opponent if you have really good Overwatches, and just be like, hey, don't forget I have like a million flamers over here or whatever. If they're unfamiliar with your army, I also think too, to some extent, it's like a question about player level. I think that's something that gets kind of forgotten a little bit. I do consider that like your knowledge of my army should be part of your ability to win the game. And if you forget that I have a cool thing, right? Oh, I forgot don't forget I have an enhancement that gives you fight first or whatever. Or don't forget I have like bonus to charge. This intervention is really easy. Like that's something. But if you're just like, oh, I didn't know that guy had a torrent weapon. You're like, I mean, we did talk about it previously. I don't know. If you're a very good player who like tells your opponent that you know all of their stuff and then you forget that their weapons do, I do feel like that's a little bit to some extent on you. Orbital bombardment strats. There was one time in 8th edition where you could orbital bombardment like 10 times, and it was actually really good. That's when it finally got solid. All right. Let's talk about some feel bads. Feel bads time. A move block feel bad situation from Fit Froyo. 92.99. It was round 4 of the my second game last Sunday. So we are 9 rounds into 40K. Playing Tyranids versus Chaos Space Marines on Lynchpin. His unit of Warped Talons were 10 inches from my home. So I decided to block them with my gargoyles to prevent them from reaching my home. Being unfamiliar with Chaos Space Marines, I pulled a great line and even got it within... a move blocking, like a skirmish line, and got it within 1.5 inches of his unit, being very vocal and clear about my intentions. He looks at me, trying to do everything perfectly for a good 1 to 2 minutes. As his turn comes, he said, "That's a good idea, but I have jump pack, so it doesn't matter," and then took my home objective. A simple unit. This unit has fly would have made me dispose of them differently, blocking more real estate and preventing him from going over. What do you all say? This is an awkward one, chat. To some extent, I mean, if you're new, it sounds like this player's new, and for sure, being new with Chaos Space Marines, you don't expect every player to know every keyword that every unit has. If you were in the game for a little while, you look at a unit of guys with jetpacks, and then not at least asking whether or not they have fly is a little bit of a misplay, I think. But it is kind of a jerk move from his opponent to like watch him just run a unit of like gargoyles just off an objective and do nothing, and then be like, "You're an idiot." So this is a weird situation. This is a super duper weird one. Yeah, it's definitely a newbie growing pain, and it feels like a situation where, like, I don't know. I don't know how competitive this game is. It could be like, if it's round 2 on a Sunday, maybe they're GT finals or something, in which case I would expect for you not to make that mistake probably. But it feels like someone who's taking advantage of a new player in a way that's like probably unsportsmanlike, right? To some extent, right? You're at the end of the second game of 40K of the day. It might just be that you're tired and you're not looking at stuff and you're like, oh, there's a Chaos Space Marine unit over there. Whatever. I think they're just Chaos Space Marines. But if you mistake a jump pack unit for a ground unit, I think you're probably pretty new. And if I was in a position where I was playing against a new person who had never played my army before and clearly didn't know what my units were, you gotta help them out, man. Like, and this is a case where your opponent doesn't know what like your basic infantry do. And you're gonna try hard them by I don't know, just pulling that move, I guess. So like some of the context around this game, I guess, is important, but to some extent, I don't think someone who would make the mistake that a jetpack unit is not a flying unit is someone who's like hyper competitive in the game, and that you're probably like having a very struggling game against. I don't want to be like, down on the OP here, but it feels to me like they're probably new, right? And just not experienced, which is like totally fine. And if you're playing against something like that, you should help them out. Sounds like his opponent's got a little bit of a jerk. I don't even know. Jump packs 2 give you wings. Yeah. Surely you destroy the new player to feel better about yourself. Yeah, dude. That's a great victory. Great victory. I destroyed somebody who didn't know what my basic infantry were. Like that was an incredibly strong win on my end. Let's go. So it's like, yeah, this feels unless there was like the gargoyles like were able to accomplish something else by doing this, like a screening, a deep strike or something. Or my opponent was like sometimes you play somebody who's very experienced who just doesn't know what your army is, right? And in those cases, I'm a little bit less forgiving, where it's like, I'm playing like a GT winner or whatever, and he's like playing around, and then he's like, oh wait, I didn't know what your army did. I'm like, all right, man, I don't know. But if I'm playing in a casual game and I'm playing somebody who clearly doesn't know what my keywords are, I feel like you give them a little help out, and then they're clearly making like what is obviously the wrong move, right? They're spending 2 minutes taking blank action, essentially, right? And it's very clear that their interpretation of the board state is different than yours. Fucking say something, man. I don't know. So this is a weird situation because, like, I do think, like, if we're going to play rules as written or whatever, Fit Froyo here would probably not have that much of a leg to stand on because, like, well, I was lacking the game knowledge of what my opponent's army did, and I didn't ask them or anything. But I think in context, his opponent's kind of not a very nice person. I don't know. He has a fly unit, so he should know the units. Is that true? Well, like, I don't know. That doesn't sound very charitable at all. I don't even know. Someone specific enough to think of specific formations and distances and move blocks, but not experienced enough to recognize jetpack infantry. I mean, so there's like some generalized knowledge that I don't think requires a lot of experience in the game, right? And move blocking is an easy one. Like if you're someone who has played miniature games or tabletop games before, or even just fucking strategy games, I don't know. Or you like, I watched a bunch of battle reports and I saw like Art of War did this on a live stream and they talked about this strat. I'm going to do that, right? I think that's totally reasonable. And it being entirely defeated by your opponent having a keyword that they didn't tell you about, feels bad. Again, like it sounds so clear to me that this person's like very new to the game or relatively new to the game, and they're just trying to make use of cool technology that they discovered But I don't know. Their opponent kind of got one over on him. Let your opponent know. But it's kind of hilarious to imagine looking at the guys that jump packs, not really they really he's gonna fly. Yeah, that's also true. Also, in fairness, it might also be a thing where you're not 100% aware of the fly mechanic. Because unlike previous editions where fly was like the only keyword that existed, and if you didn't have fly, you just didn't see play. Fly oftentimes doesn't do anything, right? In 10th edition, which I don't dislike entirely. Like, it gives you through the air movement, la-di-da, let's go. But its capacity to move over other models very rarely comes up. I could see that he forgot that it did that, maybe, or didn't know, right? I think that there's that feels to me like it's probably pretty likely that happened. So yeah, I don't. It is weird though to like, again, unless the context is that like this person just had a big brain fart, in which case it's on them, sure. And they're actually like a very competitive player or whatever, and they just forgot. Which I don't know. It doesn't seem to be like the case. If it's the point where like you and your opponent don't play super competitively or whatever, and you watch your opponent just do something that makes no sense for 2 full minutes, and you're like, and then you're like, haha, gotcha. Like that, come on. Like, I don't know. That feels to me like it's a little, it's a little beyond the pale. Lean more to the theory that they were exhausted, didn't think of it. Yeah, maybe. Should fly move like other flying units? A Darrenism. Wow, what a great idea. That hasn't been voiced yet in the chat. He went to Reddit to complain about it. He's definitely competitive. Maybe. The opponent watched him set up knowing what he was doing. Opponent was a little bit of that guy there. Probably loses to better players. This doesn't work on. I'm sorry the opponent assumed this guy had eyes. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. Didn't Primaris grav tanks that fly in 9th edition? I do get this all the time, too. A lot of people still assume that impulsors can fly because they're on a flying stand, but they're actually just hover vehicles. And it's a little bit strange because, like, Devilfish are on a flying stand as well. They do have fly, but, like, Impulsor doesn't, which is on a very slightly shorter flying stand. I mean, in those cases, it definitely it would change things. Although the instances in which fly is super relevant for grav tanks is much lower now. Can we stop calling this playing by intent? It's playing by explicitly stating the goal. Intent is an implication. I place these models here in a way to move block you from the corner. Oh, you can fit a 40 there because I moved too quickly. But wouldn't allow that given perfect play at infinite time to execute. Can I fix that? I mean, I guess, yeah. I think both cases are intent a little bit. That's an interesting. I guess it's interesting to assume that these two things are wildly different. I guess hover vehicles should be able to fly over Votan infantry. You have a semi-fly keyword that lets you move over swarms. Encouraging your impulsors to have tracks. Just wait for 11th edition when they get flyback. It's gonna be amazing. Tirakan, he was kind of a bad player, but also Warp Talons are explicitly models with huge jetpacks. Last thing I would do is look at the models and try to guess their keywords. Aquilons also have huge jetpacks that don't have fly. That's a great example, actually. Aquilons do look like they have fly. That blew my fucking mind when they didn't have fly. They weren't like move 12 fly infantry. I was like, oh shit, we're gonna have like move 15 guys because you get move. And have a jetpack, and then they came out and were only deep strike. That's actually Giuseppe over here makes a great point that sometimes the jetpacks are, if you're inexperienced, sometimes the physicality of a model can be deceiving. Also, do Harlequins still fly? They did for a really long time because they have flip belts, or they had a rule that aped fly, right? There's some weird ones that There's some weird examples of things that fly, but like feel like they shouldn't. No, Harlequins do not fly. Oh, warp spiders. Warp spiders is the perfect one, right? Yeah. So warp spiders are fly jump packs, but they are in their miniatures are neither flying nor really have jump packs. You're like you look at a warp spider. Grab. So we look at a warp spider. We're like, okay, he's got this backpack on, but all the models are very solidly standing on the ground. And we look at a swooping hawk. All right. So you're going to tell me that not only do these two models have the same set of keywords, but this one moves faster? What? Excuse me? So I don't know. I think there are cases in which the miniatures are like actively confusing when it comes to their keywords. I don't think Warp Talons is a good example, but there are definitely cases where things that should or should not have fly, or look like they should or should not have fly, may or may not have it. And if you're like brand new to the game, it's overwhelming, right? So I don't know. I feel like I can give this game the benefit of the doubt. That's an odd one because you have to know the lore of a unit to understand why it flies. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Canoptic Race at least are like, they're on their tails, but they are like, the implication is that they're hovering, right? So it's like, I get it. But that is a weird one. There's a weird thing in 10th, and I honestly, I don't know how to feel about this. I'm conflicted because there's a thing that's happened in 10th edition where the gamification of the game has kind of split, and it does this thing very often where it splits the mechanics and the lore of a unit to the point where sometimes it's difficult to fit them back together. Because in previous editions, right, without universal special rules, you would be like, well, okay, so like I know why this unit has this thing because it's named a specific, it's named something specific. I'm sure I can find an example if I look up for a moment here. But like a warp spider flying makes sense, right? Because warp spiders previously, right, they didn't have fly, but they had they like teleported themselves around, and you're like, okay, I get it. So like the idea is that they go through things or over things by teleporting, right? It's not necessarily a flight, but it is it's a more esoteric form of movement. But in 10th edition, it's just represented by having the fly keyword, even though and it is, to my knowledge, and not a lore person, but to my knowledge, like they've never been, described as flying in any of the lore. And you're like, why do they do that? And you're like, well, because it's a mechanical simplification of their lore. And to some extent, I think that cleans up the game quite a bit, right? Having a unit that flies versus having a unit that has its own bespoke form of movement is really is much simpler. But it does create these weird situations where you're like, why does that guy have that ability, or why does that guy have that keyword? It doesn't make sense. There's a bunch of weapons that, like, for whatever have like devastating wounds or like random keywords, even though they don't feel like they should. But it's because they're aping ability they had previously. So, you can teleport now. You get hit more easily by sky rays. that is a weird. There's some weird implications like that. Very rarely do they matter, it feels like, but every once in a while it does come up for sure. Do mandrakes have movement rules? No, they just have up down. They just they redeploy themselves. They don't like move faster. They just go into reserve at the end of your opponent's turn, and then they come back for a pain token. So anyway, chance. This is a really interesting situation. Kind of surprised by the responses here. It's kind of dumb of you to think they had you didn't think they had fly. But I would 100% stop my opponent and clarify to them that my opponent has fly if I saw them trying to move block. I don't want to win that way. The other thing I wonder too, I would love to see a picture of this situation because I feel like I don't know. I feel to some extent like maybe there's context being not given here because I wonder too like if it was like only a unit of Warp Talons or if it was like several units and you were like I'm gonna move block them, prevent them from charging and consolidating to the objective, and then my objective will be protected. And your opponent goes like, well, this unit has fly, and then hops over. And in that case, your opponent's like I don't know. It's much less defensible because your move block is still doing something. If they spent a full 2 minutes literally move blocking only a unit that can't be move blocked, yeah, that is weird. But I do wonder if there was like another purpose that the move block could have been serving. Otherwise, the opponent could be like, the opponent could be like, oh, that's a good move. You're doing this one thing, but it doesn't defeat this other unit of Warp Talons that I have, and that Fit Froyo here might have just not missed, or might have just missed or something. I don't know. I don't know, Chance. Cool. All right. There's one more thing to talk about before we get to our main topic today. It is an interesting rules conundrum, chat, that I noticed was pretty curious. Came up, and if you're a Leagues of Votann player, probably important for you. Denying your opponent resources with sequencing. Hello, everyone. I was wondering how the broader 40k community judges this interaction. When you go first against Leagues of Votann, you are technically allowed to deny them their first yield point because checking for ownership of the objective and the awarding of yield points happens at the end of the command phase. So the player's turn, whose turn it is, decides the yield point step happens before checking the ownership and thus denying them their resource. This is rules as written. Is this considered bad sportsmanship? Because it loopholes the army rule of your opponent. Is it bad sportsmanship of the Votann player to basically have one yield point more by not making your opponent aware of the interaction? Has this situation occurred at any high-level competitive Leagues of Votann games are you aware of? How was this handled? So this used to be, there were a lot more effects that came into play like this. I think the biggest one was like Gretchen, where like Gretchen checked for control of objective, but they did so before the first objective control, like check step. And it wasn't a sequence. It was a sequencing thing in that like it was written poorly by Games Workshop, and it meant that if you were the orc player and you went first, Gretchen wouldn't do anything. This is the case, and there are other cases in which sequencing of objective control can change abilities, especially. So especially if you have effects like, in some cases, you're right, you can sequence effects to gain or lose control of objectives so that you can like change shadows or like hallowed ground and stuff like that before it comes into play for abilities. And it feels to me like if that's an open question, if you're the person with the ability, you should always assume that your opponent sequenced these things correctly. Obviously, I'm a big apologist for rules as written. I think we should all play by the rules, and then we can complain about the rules until they get changed if they're bad. And I do think this is a case of a bad rule, because I think basically like giving your opponent unspoken control over whether or not your ability works is not good, because if they don't tell you it doesn't work, you have like, you could, say, oh, you didn't tell me to sequence it, so I assumed you were going to sequence it in the way that's better for me. You shouldn't do that, because obviously if they know the interaction, they won't choose the way that gives you extra resources. But I do think it's something that could be changed, right? And it's probably real. It's probably realistic. Is there a clarification that ownership of objectives happens after all of the command phase things? I think that there is a clarification that scoring it's. I have to look this up. I believe there's a clarification that victory conditions are checked after all other things, and I don't believe it's ever been like clarified whether objective control is a victory condition. I think that is purely I believe that is purely scoring things. So there's a player controls an objective marker at the end of any phase or turn in which their level of control over it is greater than their opponent's. At the end of a turn, control of objective markers is determined before any victory points are scored. So you always check LOC before victory points, But I don't think there's a role that requires that level of control is sequenced last. Right? And this was good when this got added because there was a bunch of weird interactions with that. But it basically always says that you always score points last, but it doesn't say anything about LOC. So theoretically, you could do all your other shit, right? All of your other control determinations, then control LOC, then score points. And I don't think there's any rule that says otherwise, unless I'm mistaken. Which is pretty, yeah, I don't know, pretty weird. Everyone's surprised Pikachu face when you force a sequence roll off for Scout versus Rad Bomb. Oh yeah, scouting like pregame stuff is always like a kind of a nightmare. I don't even know if I could necessarily tell you the order in which all pregame things happen because they're all sort of nebulously start a battle, which is always kind of an annoying situation. Sticky objectives rule works in your first command phase, which means you can sequence sticky objectives after controlling the objective. Right. It also means that you can sequence things beforehand, though, right? Too is the other, which is the issue that's happening here. I guess it's end of any turn, right? Is when this isn't strictly end of phase. I think I don't know, misrepresented that a little bit when I first read through it. This is explicitly turns, not phases. So you could sequence LOC before other stuff. There's also weirdness with like, this comes up with demons quite a bit, where you sequence, if you're the active player, you sequence level of control before or after rapid ingress, because rapid ingress is end of the turn or end of the movement phase, right? So it's simultaneous with level of control being recalculated. So whether or not like this changes like how hallowed ground gets controlled and stuff, right? If you check level of control, then do rapid ingress, then you haven't rechecked level of control until end of the shooting phase, for example. Or if you check level of control first, then for demons, this matters for Shadow of Chaos. If you check level of control first, when the demon's not on the objective, or you take an objective, then you check level of control to change where the shadow is, then you sequence the rapid ingresses, then they're forced to rapid ingress farther away from you. So there's like a bunch of weird bullshit that happens because of the level of control sequencing at the end of, particularly at the end of the movement phase, but it also comes into play for command phase stuff too. Don't end of command phase things happen before Battle Shock? No. Absolutely wrong. And before Battle Shock step is part of the command phase. Then when you go to end of Battle Shock step, you go to end of command phase stuff, which is why if you fail a Battle Shock test, you no longer control the objective you're standing on because you go from Battle Shock test, reduce myself to OC0 for failing, then I check level of control. I have 0 OC here, so I don't take the objective. Otherwise, you would check level of control, then you would Battle Shock, and then it wouldn't matter. Battle Shock would be super irrelevant. I have a whole video about the command phase, actually, if you want to go check it out in my ridiculous rules section. I even give a flowchart of how the command phase is actually meant to be sequenced. So I think this is another situation where I think that this is just a rules issue. I definitely think that it is the correct play, and I don't think it's bad sportsmanship, to deny Leagues of Votann scoring before they have controlled an objective, right? I think that that's objectively the correct way to play. However, I think that that's an unintuitive interaction, and I don't like the interactions where it low-key requires you to be cognizant of it and to voice that to your opponent to play correctly. I don't like that. I think that the game should try to run itself in a smooth way as possible, and this gear checks that, right? Feels pretty unintentional. If you can deny it, then why would it even state its scores in your opponent turn? Your opponent would always deny it. Because sometimes you already have the objective, and that's a weird discussion. Must slow roll if trying to use command reroll thing. GW eventually had to roll their eyes out and explicitly say, no, you don't need a slow roll to use command reroll. Oh, chance. I've got a video. I'm editing it. Some people are going to lose their minds. That is a can of worms you don't want to go down, my guy. They talk about playtesting quite a bit. To some extent, I don't know if this is like playtesting enough. It's proofreading essentially. You need people to go through and like really like try to break down the core mechanics, and so that you can design them in a more explicit way. And I do think like to what we talked about before, flowcharting a lot of the stuff might be easier. They try to write it out in paragraph form, but realistically what they should do is just make a flowchart for every phase and be like, this is when things happen. And then you could always put level of control recalculation before like other end of phase effects, and then just have a specific step for things like yield points that always happens after level of control. So you don't have to like go through this whole rigmarole. Realistically, that's what they should do. Proofreading by people that rule lawyer. Yeah, 100%. That's the thing. There was one that somebody told me in a game recently, and I can't remember what it was, but I was like, it was very technical. I can't remember it. I can't remember exactly what it was. Oh, there's a funny situation. I don't think this was it, but there's a funny situation where if you have like damage reduction effects and bonus, there's an interaction with a blade of armor and bonus damage where you get a blade of armor damage characteristic to 0, add bonus damage, but because the blade of armor applies before the saving throw is made, you still get to roll a save against the bonus damage. That was a funny one that came up in a game, not super recently, but relatively recently. That is like makes total sense once you think about it, but I don't think I'd ever considered before. It's like, yeah, I still get a save even though your base damage characteristic is 0. And technically I still have to roll the save, but it only ever matters if you're in like Melta range or something. I guess I just don't shoot at many things with Melta guns that have a blade of armor effects. The rules are extremely daunting, make the game inaccessible for a lot of people. Yeah. It's better than it used to be, but 10th edition is it does feel a little 8th edition-y where the FAQs are like spiraling out of control. And part of it's that part of it's that they refuse to go through and like change stuff. They instead just errata over it, right? And I think that's like kind of a problem. A good example is like the Space Marine, like Oath of Moment in the Space Marines, where it's like they did a balance update. Then they've like changed the balance update like 3 different times, and then added qualifiers to the balance update. And you're like, why didn't we just go into the new faction packs they have and just change the rule and just say like, just make it much more simpler so that you have to you head off and can deal with all of these rules issues that are happening. Problem with printed rules over digital. Yeah, that is a certain part of it for sure. Armor of Contempt still written the old way, new detachments. Yeah. That one's so funny because every time the new detachment comes out, I think it's a meme at this point. You can't all be serious, right? Every time a new AOC comes out, somebody's like, oh, did you see? It has the old AOC wording. No, they all have that wording. It's just being overwritten by a balanced data slate. The other thing too is that like the balanced data slate being a separate document is not positive in my mind. I don't think that's the way it should be, because realistically, right, if I'm on Warhammer Community, I'm in the download section and I'm reading through the erratas, I'm probably already enfranchised enough to be using the balanced data slate regardless, right? It seems like what they want to do is they want to they want to like foster a community of people who don't use the balanced data slate but do use erratas. But in some cases, they errata for balance anyway. So just unify the two, because it restricts an entire series of documents that someone has to read through to understand the game, right? Because you need to know the core rules. Then you also need to know the rules commentary, which is getting bigger and bigger and more annoying, which honestly should just be updates to the core rules. The rules commentary doesn't need to be a separate document, in my opinion. It's crazy that it is. If there's an FAQ thing where it's easily accessible, sure, but there's erratas in there and like fully rebalanced mechanics, right? The movement phase has been rewritten from the ground up. Why is that in a separate document that we have to hold both of them up next to each other and see where the changes are? That's nuts. And then also, right, you then also have a faction FAQ and a data slate that either contradicts or modifies the FAQ, which is crazy. That's too much. and we're getting to this point where you need like a whole extra book of different printouts in order to play the game. And I don't think you need that. We can make it so that you only need one or two. And right now it's just like it's going wild. I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about the big thing. Pretty much the only way to get the current rules is by word of mouth. Yeah. And honestly, like even content creators and stuff, we're getting to the point. Like I'm at the point, right, where like a lot of this stuff, I don't necessarily have 100% grasp on 100% of the mechanics all the time. And like I spend hours every week like looking through rules and erratas and stuff for very particular wordings on things. And it's so broad that there are interactions that like I've never been interfaced with. And that's wild. Which is pretty cool. We're going to start with a clean slate in 11th. Happens every edition. I don't this might be rose-tinted glasses for sure, but I seem to remember that the game state at the end of 9th edition was much less complex in terms of its erratas than it is currently right now, and it was in 8th edition. 8th edition was wild. My favorite story in 8th edition was that my opponent, or my friend, he's my housemate now, but he was at LVO and he was playing an opponent, and he charged with a Death Guard unit. He was playing mixed chaos because you could play whatever factions you wanted all together. He was playing mixed chaos, and he charged with a Plague Marine squad or a Blight Hauler squad, and was like, "All right, I'm 3 attacks up to 4 thanks to Shock Assault." Now, Shock Assault was like they always have. Space Marines always get a special rework at the end of each edition. It's happened every time. And it's 100% because like they're the poster child factions and they're always released first. And then they gradually just get power cracked really hard. And so they have to rebalance them towards the end of the edition. It happened last year with the +1 to, or earlier this year, whenever it happened, with the +1 to wound oath the moment thing. It happened last edition with Armor of Contempt, which is a permanent AOC bonus to every single Space Marine unit in the entire game. Wild, crazy. And it happened in 8th edition with a rule called Shock Assault, which gave you +1 attack if you, on the first round of each combat. So if you charged or were charged, you get +1 attack. So he goes, my Blight Haulers are going to charge. I get +1 attack for Shock Assault. His opponent goes, why? You're like a demon engine. He's like, well, I'm a Death Guard unit, so I'm a Chaos Space Marine. I have the Heretic Astartes keyword, so I gain the Shock Assault ability. And his opponent goes, where's that said? And he goes, oh, I don't know. And so they called a judge over, spent 15 minutes, and they found that it had been added to a Death Guard unit because of its inclusion of the Heretic Astartes keyword, which was called out in a Space Marine FAQ. Not Death Guard, not Chaos Space Marines. A Space Marine FAQ modified a keyword that affected the Death Guard Codex. That's fucking nuts. And I do feel like we're sliding close to that level. I don't remember it in 9th edition being quite this bad in terms of the breadth of erratas that you need to have in front of you in order to actually comprehend the game state. But wild, dude. 7th edition was the worst? Oh, I didn't play 7th edition, so I missed it. I dodged a bullet, I guess. Pretty wild. 6 to 7 different published codexes and campaign books in order to fully grasp memories rules. Yeah, it did get crazy back in the day because you would get
Regiments of Renown from a campaign book that would get a subfaction ability from a white dwarf that was a modification of a subfaction from its own subfaction book, which required the codex, which then obviously you needed like the core rules in order to get your detachments from. And then the core rules had an FAQ, and each of those had an FAQ. And it was like, yeah, I used to watch people walk around for the events that required you had all your printed material. They would walk around on the little carts, the little Amazon carts you get you put your army on the top. And then the second shelf was just all books and printouts. It was like, whoa. And most of those were modifying each other anyway. So 99% of the paper there was unnecessary and irrelevant. So anyway, chats. Let's talk about the big thing today. I'm done talking about old editions. We're going to a new edition in 6 months or so here. We've got an edition that's currently being updated. Let's talk about the big topic today. Let's talk about fair play in Warhammer 40K. This is a hot button issue that was announced earlier this week over on the competitive Reddits from the user appropriately named Fair Play 40K. Hello, everyone, they say. There have been a lot of talk this year about prominent cases of cheating and bad behavior by players. With World Championships of Warhammer over, I'd like to announce a new 40K organization that is debuting for the 2026 ITC season, Fair Play 40K, an organization aimed at improving the 40K community throughout our misconduct reporting system, as well as our sportsmanship shoutouts program to highlight great opponents. The 2026 system will serve as a test run for this, will serve as a test run for this system. We are a small group of experienced players and TOs, local to Chicago and Milwaukee, partnered with interested tournament organizers in the Midwest U.S., and hope to further refine the system as it begins to roll out. If it proves to be effective, I would love to see it implemented more broadly, perhaps partnering with larger organizations. If it works well, pipe dreams include a website, app, or integration within Best Coast pairings down the line. If you can read all about Fair Play 40K and its misconduct reporting system using the following links. We will read those in a sec. They have we'll read through. We'll spark notes all this stuff. Why does Fair Play 40K exist? Until up to now, the competitive Warhammer 40K community has been a wild west. When it comes to policing player conduct, ITC and Code of Conduct, now the FLG Code of Conduct has been influential in changing the culture of Warhammer. There's never been a single unified body that tracks and responds to player misconduct. This leaves individual TOs in the position of having to be the sole authority for identifying, adjudicating, and punishing player misconduct at their events. Most TOs run tournaments for their enjoyment of the game and may feel uncomfortable with the punitive aspects of the job. Definitely, I think part of the case for sure. I think TOCs, like tournament or organizational corporations or committees, are much better at this because they have a financial incentive to do so. But individual TOs who run like their local community, I think that puts a ton of pressure on them. Someone who's already like wildly overworked, which always feels bad. But like I want to give a shout out to like Away Games, for example, and like NTL, ATC, like team formats. They do a great job at just like universally sort of tracking player misconduct, and the rare cases that it happens. So. I think Frontline Gaming gets a lot of flack for their handling of their kind of light-handed handling of player conduct, but they do it to some extent. However you feel about them, they do have a system in place. Fair Play 40K aims to change that, as well as to celebrate those players who act as beacons of friendliness and sportsmanship. So I do feel a little bit. I guess we'll talk about this after we talk about all this stuff. We believe that most players who create negative play experiences for their opponents aren't fully aware of the impact they're having. And our misconduct reporting system is designed to give them feedback prior to punitive action. For the few individuals out there who deliberately seek to mislead or cheat their opponents, the misconduct reporting system, all caps, we could just call it MRS. It's kind of fun. Is also designed to identify those players and limit their ability to negatively impact the community. Conversely, the sportsmanship shoutout program, the SSO, or call it shoutout program, SOP. Love a good SOP. Is designed to be a space for players to recognize opponents who live the 40K community's ideals of fun, friendly competition. Fair Play 40K is not a TO or judging organization, but rather an organization that supports TOs and judges who choose to have their events participate in the system. There's some details. Player misconduct works like points on a driver's license. 6 points to a monitoring period, 12 points to a ban. So I guess like they probably will require that Like, I don't know how you're going to enforce a ban, to be perfectly honest. But it's more of a symbolic thing. Like 90% of 40K is symbolic anyway. You know, who wins GTs doesn't really have any money with it or anything. Like you're doing it for the clout. If you also get the negative clout of getting a bunch of negative points on your 40K driver's license, I guess it's some sort of similar. Players accrue points through misconduct reports submitted by opponents and TOs, not bystanders. I do like that. Not being able to just like report someone for misplaying on a live stream or something is definitely good. Player submitted unverified reports are 1 point. TO verified reports are more depending on the type of misconduct. Categories include problematic conduct, problematic play or angle shooting, hate speech, intentional cheating, and illegal activity. Imagine it's like, I don't know, is that like theft, assault or something, I guess? I feel it, to some extent, some of this feels like it is over and above the an outside organization's place to enforce. And to some extent, like, I don't know, the law of the country you're in. It's like, are we going to put, is illegal activity like game mechanics? It kind of sounds like it means like, if you do drugs at the table, you get 10 demerits, which is like, I don't know. I feel like either you should get kicked from the venue or have the police called. I think that that's a jurisdiction, not of an internet group, unless it's like illegal activity in the game, I guess, which is just cheating. Max of 1 report per game. Gaining more than 6 points in a single event is unlikely but possible, which just requires that you get TO. Probably 3 TO reports, right? Reports must be submitted within 7 days of the end of the event. Players within a monitoring period will be fined to participating TOs for active judging, but will not receive points for further unverified reports. So you can receive... Okay. So to break, it says breakdown, I believe what it says. The first ban is last 1 year with monitoring afterwards. Subsequent bans may be permanent. 24 months with no reports wipes away the last 6 points of misconduct. Reports aren't contestable, but false reporting is punished somehow. So I think, right, the way it works is that you can receive up to 6 reports from opponents, right? Then that puts you into monitoring, and from there you can only gain reports from TOs, right? Because it says that you will not receive points for unverified reports if you're within the monitoring period, which is if you have 6 points on your record. So if you play 6 different people, and they all submit reports, it doesn't ban you, it just flags you basically, and then that requires that TOs monitor you, unless I'm misreading. There is a TO enrollment form. You can look at the tournaments that have signed up. There's a little awkwardly, I guess. Is this in the thing? There's a list of participating tournaments somewhere. I think it's in there. Ooh, that's bright. Hello, flash bomb. Oh shit, my I bet my dark mode thing is messing with it. I'll have to turn that off. Can I do that? Does that work? There it is. Hello. List of participating TOs. They do list. This is not entirely visible. They do list maybes, which I think is a little bit weird. I don't know. That's a little strange, but it is what it is. There are some larger events that are looking at getting involved. So yeah, chat. What do we think? Heroin 40K, indeed. This is about to turn 40K to a bunch of narcs. Yeah. The illegal. I guess like so. If we read does this document have more information in it? No, it's exactly the same as what we just read. Okay. Misconduct reporting system. This is okay. There's a whole thing on reportable actions. Nice. The system only applies to official competitive events that are listed in BCP. Oh boy. Okay. That's an interesting sort of. There's a movement in the community a little bit away from Best Coast pairings, which I don't. I mean, I like Best Coast pairings just because I've been using it forever and it's the biggest one. It is a little bit unfortunate that it makes it more difficult to like pull stats if the community like moves out of BCP. But if this only allows BCP, it's basically only usable within the US, right? Because there's a huge swath of events overseas that do not use Best Coast pairings. I wonder why it restricts it to Best Coast pairings. Maybe it's like easier to verify that the event happened or whatever. But you could just say that it's like listed in any like of the major tournament or like listing groups. I don't know. For problematic conduct or play to be reportable, it is present in multiple instances throughout the game or for a significant period of time. Most people occasionally get rules or measurements wrong or get frustrated at bad luck. Players might consider particularly significant single actions as reportable. Hate speech or verifiable cheating are reported based on a single instance and should be brought to TO or judge for confirmation immediately. The following descriptions are examples of reportable actions, but not an exhausted list. Problematic conduct, being belligerent or name calling, displaying violence at the table, personal attacks, other unsportsmanlike behavior that doesn't impact gameplay but makes for a negative play experience. Okay. Problematic or angle shooting, rolling dice without declaring the purpose of the rolls, picking up dice without your opponent being able to verify, overly fast rolling or rolling dice in terrain or out of sight, repeated or egregious sloppy model movement resulting in extra movement, misplaying rolls for personal benefit, weaponizing the clock. That one always kind of throws me for a loop. Cover situations where there's a problematic play, but there's not a clearly identifiable instance to cheat. This worries me a little bit, right? Because to some extent, but the clock rules and for that I have for Tabletop Simulator, it does specify that like clock management it's a little easier in TTS because you can actively see when the clock's like up, there's a HUD and stuff. But it's easy to forget. It does specify that like the clock being on the correct player is always the responsibility of both players, right? So if you're like, oh, I forgot to put the clock back or something like that, it is of equal responsibility. You should always, it should never be running when you're doing stuff. But if that's ever messed up, right, you can't immediately blame your opponent for that. And I'm a little worried that like that occurs here, right? This feels very, it feels a little open-ended. Clock stuff is always weird because like it's not a game mechanic in 40K, right? So it's not something that has like a clear cut set of rules that you can follow. And it's always been pretty strange. Hate speech, insulting or demeaning a player using their race, ethnicity, gender identity, religion, disability status, or neurodivergence. Then people are going to get up in arms about that. I obviously think that we shouldn't be doing that, especially people we just met and don't if you don't know, we should be limiting our language potentially, unless you're very comfortable in the environment. But I do feel like people are going to take that one out of context quite a bit. Clocks are inappropriate. Got them. Intentionally cheating in-game using loaded or tricked dice, manipulated data cards, game aids, deliberately misrepresenting or lying about rules, concealing game information in response to direct questions, lying about the game state, egregious measurement, rules, dice errors that demonstrate clear intent to cheat. All right. Points per offense. You immediately get 6 points if you do hate speech. All right. Good to know, I guess. So it's 1 point for problematic conduct. It's unverified. 2 points for problematic conduct. So you have to be verified to get more than 1 point, I guess, entirely. Illegal activity is 12. What does that mean? If I jaywalk on my way to a tournament, am I immediately reported for illegal activity? Is it stealing from an LGS event or player? So like hard drugs such as cocaine during an event or sexual misconduct of any kind. Yeah, but I guess so. I feel like that. I guess that's so weird. So here's my thought process here, right? Is that is something that I feel like should be enforced outside of the gaming community, right? Like, is it the Warhammer 40K's community's place to enforce if you want to sell drugs? I don't know if it is. Obviously, stealing from an LGS is important. Is bad, right? Like if you're thieving from people in the community or you're assaulting them, right? Should 100% with consequences. You should be ejected from the event, right? And I think if we were tracking that stuff in some sort of universal system, that makes total sense, right? Hey, we have a police report of this guy caught on camera stealing from the game store that you were running a GT at. Definitely, like, I don't know, you can attach it to the account, but it's weird and feels a little inappropriate to me to rank that alongside my opponent didn't tell me that his warp talons flew, right? Like that those two things are comparable. I don't know. Does that read strangely to anyone? Caffeine and nicotine, also hard drugs. You brought a monster to an LGS? You're out, buddy. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like, one is toy soldier rules, the other one's real life rules. Yeah, for sure. As much as I love talking about game mechanics, right? That's like my favorite thing. And enforcement of game mechanics obviously is an important part of those. It feels like we're reaching another level when we start talking about, like, trying to establish in-game consequences for what is essentially like IRL behavior. It's interesting. Anyway. So, yeah. So that's what's up. So here's a hot take. You ready for a hot take, chat? While I don't 100% know if this is the way that this should be, that this needs to be gone about, I do think that a system of this kind is necessary. And it is probably a stepping stone to something better, right? This feels like the first step in the right direction. And I do think that there are certainly some parts that I think are probably abusable or like won't work correctly. Like, you are still putting onus on the TOs a lot of times, where, like, it shouldn't be the TO's goal to, like, have to enforce sportsmanship on everything. But now, you might have a bunch of flags that they have to watch out for, and you might be enforcing that they ban particular players, like based on reports through a website. What I do like is that it seems that there cannot be a ban without TO involvement, which I think is good. If I'm reading the rules correctly, right, you can only ever get flagged by other players. Oops. But you cannot ban people for other players, right? 12 points to a ban. And you only ever get to a monitoring period without unverified stuff. There are some people who are saying that TOs might abuse this, like the system, I guess, which I don't know. I guess if that's your problem, then you're not really trusting the TOs very much at all, which I don't know is necessarily the mindset that I would take. What if the TO is a police officer? You can do hate speech 11 times. Well, I think hate speech is worth 6, right? You get 5 unverified hate speeches and then one verified hate speech. And then you got to cool it for a year, I guess. That is like that does, I think, exactly describe the weird juxtaposition that it feels like, that putting that and, like, on table misconduct in the same bracket. You know what I mean? Like, that feels so strange. Like, if I cheat at 40K 4 times and then like drop hard R's on someone, like, those, in some cases are in this way considered to be somehow similar, which is very weird to me. I don't know if I like it being a points system, Maybe that's my problem. Maybe I don't like the points. Maybe the points, the rules are made up and the points don't matter. Yeah, what activates illegal activity? Yeah, they had some stuff like that. I don't know. Do they decay? They do. There is a decay. In 2 years. Sorry, in 2 years. 2 years from your last report wipes away 6 points. I have a sneaking suspicion that in a lot of cases, right, because some of this can be, you can submit unverified reports to them. And I have in a lot of cases, it feels to me like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'm not giving enough credit to the community, but it feels like a lot of players could accrue 6 points and then just like sort of stay at 6 points forever. Because every once in a while they play a game and their opponent's kind of heated, right? And their opponent's like, oh, I didn't like that guy. And so they give him a thing. And then you just end up with a bunch of players at 6 points that the TOs now have a responsibility to like look out for. Even though it's like, every 18 months at an RTT, I have a game that gets a little spicy. And somebody submits a report and that just refreshes my entire, it doesn't accrue any additional report, any additional points, but it refreshes my record, right? Which I think just naturally happens. And that's not any case of, you can easily be holding 6 points on your record over a long enough period of time without doing anything, right? Without cheating, without, attacking anyone verbally. I imagine that like I've 100% played games where one of us, if we had been playing at a local tournament, one of us would have, maybe received a report from the other one at that tournament. It just happens when you have two people in the room. Sometimes your personalities don't jive. Sometimes, things happen in the game or in real life and you aren't having a great time. And if you were hot enough, you might like go submit a form, against them. And then that like sticks on a record forever. And now a TO has to look at that for the rest of time, potentially forever if it keeps happening. Right. Like all I have to do over the course of like 5 years, right? All I have to do is receive a report every like year and a little bit, and it will none of them will ever go away, and they'll just constantly be refreshed. And that means like 1 out of every 200 games of 40K I play isn't a great one, and suddenly like this record just sits on my profile forever. I don't know. I think to some extent, the reports should probably be different. I think that we're basically trying to police 3 different things here. We're trying to police basically like what it essentially comes down to, like criminal misconduct almost, right? Right? Illegal, assault, theft, hate speech, those kind of things I think are to be, I don't know if they should be added to a point system that also encompasses game misplay. You're also then trying to police sportsmanship, right? So you and your opponent could just be having a bad time, right? Even if none of you cheat, the game could be not fun. Does that mean you should receive the same level of flag from them for literally cheating, right? The punishment, if you don't have a judge at the table, the punishment is the same for literally lying to my opponent about my dice rolls versus saying that their army's stupid, right? And I feel like those two things, especially alongside like stealing from someone, I don't know if they all belong in the same pot. I think that there can be a more nuanced, set of punishments. Bad sportsmanship sucks and you're an idiot and you're an asshole, but isn't illegal, like isn't against the rules. You just suck and no one likes you. But should that have, if my opponent accuses me of calling them dumb and my opponent accuses me of literally moving my models during their turn, should those two things, if the reports are unverified, have the exact same repercussion? I don't think so. So part of it's that the reports are unverified. I think what I would like to see is that reports are, maybe they can be unverified but not unreviewed. And I would like to see that sportsmanship is tracked in a different way, if it's tracked at all, from actual cheating, right? I think we're juxtaposing the two, and I don't think necessarily that's totally appropriate. So I think it feels like it would be better to me if, for example, you play a game and your opponent is actively cheating. Oh, Bucket, thank you for the super chat. Appreciate you.
Buckets of Steel Cable donated $2.79 through super chat. Thank you for the game. Please give me 5 stars.
Absolutely, sir. I'll do the little what's the Black Mirror episode where everyone social rates each other? 5 stars. Thank you for the coffee. 5 stars. You told a fun joke. 5 stars. I like your blazer. So I think situations where, because there's not a TO at every table all the time, right? Which is, that's part of the issue that occurs here, is that there's only maybe 2 or 3 people at a major who are actually enforcing the rules. And you call them over when you have an issue at your table, but you might not necessarily know otherwise. I think that we should incentivize players to communicate with the TOs directly. And one thing that you could do is allow TOs to review reports that are made from a tournament that they ran. For example, I was at a tournament recently, and there was a player who had been misplaying their rules. I don't want to accuse anyone of cheating, because I don't think they did it intentionally. They were misplaying a lot of their army mechanics. I think mostly because they were an idiot, not necessarily because they were actively cheating. One of their opponents came up after the game. I was with the TOs when this happened. He came up after the game. He said, "Hey man, I just played this guy. Just so you know, he made a bunch of rules mistakes. We caught him after the fact, and some of them we fixed, but there was a bunch of rules mistakes. It was a problem." And the TOs were like, "Thank you for letting us know. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do now. I'm sorry that the game, wasn't to your liking, but we appreciate that." If the TO then receives a report on that player from a different game, right? Suddenly there's now an established pattern of behavior. And at that point, I think, that's when you start, you should start to accrue points or whatever. I do think that being able to submit reports for people is probably beneficial, but I do think that those reports probably need to be verified by somebody. If a TO knows a player and has received reports on a player previously, or gets, multiple reports from different games and different people from, different communities on the same player over the course of an event, obviously that establishes a pattern. But if you have one bad game with someone, I don't think it should be listed on a permanent record. I feel like that's maybe a little heavy-handed, maybe. So I called him an idiot. -1 point from Gryffindor. I know. I'm getting an unverified report. It's gonna live on my record for the next 24 months. I hope no one else submits an unverified report against me. I do think so. There is I guess we can read some comments from people. I like the idea about how are false reports punished if reports are uncontestable. I feel like TOs should have the ability to remove a player report if it was at their event. It helps salty people from lying. Yeah, that's another good question. False reports are punished. Heavily punished, they said. But it doesn't say how they verify them, right? So again, I think it's something where someone needs to review that, right? It shouldn't just automatically go on a record, especially a public record. And then also, to some extent, you get to the point where, and I don't mean to victim blame at any point here, but there are players sometimes who immediately snap fire judge calls, right? And you do get to the point, as a TO, where you recognize the people who are they have a hair trigger when it comes to accusing their opponent of cheating. And sometimes it's just that they don't have a great game. And also, and somebody actually told a story about this at one point. I think it was in here somewhere, and I read the thing and I liked the comment, but now I can't find it. But somebody was basically I was playing an army. I think the story that they told, and it's in the comment section some here. I wonder if they were playing Genestealer cults. Oh, here we go. Yeah, we found it. All right. They're playing Genestealer cults. My first GT of 10th edition, all 3 of my first opponents reported me for cheating. I wasn't. They just weren't good players, and GSC were kind of bullshit. Yeah, and early 10th edition, Genestealer cults were incredibly dumb. One of them straight up lied to the judge about the game. In the same game, he yelled at the head judge when the judge told me he was playing tactical missions wrong. Sounds like he's not a very nice person. The TO did a bit of investigating, made sure I knew the rules, and moved on. The system would put me halfway to a monitoring period for 2 years for playing the game correctly and facing 3 people who didn't bother the rules. So like that is the part with all reports being unverified. That's the situation that I'm most worried about occurring, right? Is if like you have someone who's just like, I didn't like their army, or I didn't understand the core mechanics and they were trying to explain them to me. And like, they told, I'm a Votan player, and they told me that I can't yield point on their first turn because I haven't checked my level of control yet. That's bullshit. Clearly, it says somewhere in the rules that that's not how it works. So I'm going to report them for that, for cheating. And if it's this person who constantly does that, right? A TO, especially a local TO, would probably recognize that. Or if you're just a person who has spit off 1 million reports on your opponents for things like this, or you're a person who's received 1 million reports from your opponents for things like this, someone reviewing that could see the pattern, right? This is not a situation where, all of those should instantly be taken with the same level of they shouldn't all be given the same level of consideration, right? I think that there is a narrative here that like a community could use it to like mass report someone and like get them kicked out or whatever, which requires a lot, like a high, level of conspiracy or something. And like but potentially that could happen. But I think I would like to give the community a little bit more credit than that. But I do think that there are individuals who would not intentionally like use this for like, or not intentionally like use a system like this for harm, but might be like, overactive on it, I guess. 2 friends that don't like one person can easily game the system to ostracize anyone they don't like. So the important, I guess, 2 friends is assuming that one of them is a tournament organizer. Yeah. And if your tournament organizers are like actively weaponizing a report system, I guess so. I guess that could happen. Again, I like to give tournament organizers the benefit of the doubt. I think generally speaking, the tournament organizing community is the unsung heroes of 40K, and they get a lot of shit. And potentially, like, sure, I guess they could be collaborating with someone to like get people banned. But if that's the case, I don't know necessarily if those are the tournament organizers whose events are that fun. If they're just like cliques or whatever. I mean, I guess so. But to some extent, if you can't trust your tournament organizers, like who can you trust, right? Like they're the people running the game for you, So I don't know if I necessarily accept that as criticism. Because importantly, right, the thing is that if you're just 2 friends who play one guy and you report him a bunch of times, he'll only ever get 6 points, right? And if he only gets 6 points and all the reports are from the same group of people, well, there's one thing I guess that might be beneficial to the system is that, I guess, are the reports totally anonymous? Can we see the report form? I actually have no idea. Oh, here we go. The player version. Do I have to do this on my phone? God damn it. Come here, phone. If they're totally anonymous, then I think I might be against it. No. They require your email and BCP account. Here you go, chat. I could put this on the screen, I guess, but I'm just gonna show you. Will this resolve? No. Didn't work. All right, I can just copy this over. So it does require some amount of identifying information, which I imagine is kept on the on the back end, right? And so if all you're doing is receiving reports from the same guy, I think to some extent there's some level of oversight that can happen. But again, it needs the oversight, right? I don't believe that having totally unverified reports is the way forward. Whole idea sounds good on paper, but it needs a lot of fleshing out and more details in certain things. Sounds like there should be a responsibility of the eventio. Yeah, so the issue and the reason that this is necessary, again, I think that we will arrive at a system like this, and this feels like the first step, right, along the path. There's some people who are like, this system can never exist and is actively bad, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I don't know if I like this version of it, but I do think that to some extent, there does need to be some sort of, especially cheating, right? There needs to be a cheating report system. I also want to make clear that I don't believe cheating is crazy, like, rampant or anything. I think that like rules misplays are really easy to do in 40K, but I don't think that people are like, there's like a million people who are out actively like cheating in 40K all the time, right? It happens like, it's whatever. Intentional cheating isn't like a percentage point of games or something. But obviously, like in those there's a rare instances that there does need to be some level of record that gets generated so that we can tell if a player is consistently doing this. And one way to do that is have a some sort of report system that can assign reports to an account, right? And then if you receive a bunch of reports from different people and the TOs are like, the TOs look at that and go, I've received reports IRL about this stuff. Suddenly we're off to a good start. But I think that the ability to just drop accusations onto people totally unpublished, and the fact that it also gets rolled into like more what I would consider more serious offenses, which is like actual, like assaults and stuff, is like a little bit weird, wild. TOs aren't your daddies. They should only be concerned with cheating. Yeah, I think to some extent. I mean, a TO is fine. Like if a organizer wants to do some level of enforcement of etiquette at their events, I don't think it's totally unreasonable. It's totally up to them. But I do think that that's much more difficult. That's something that happens like on the table at the time, right? If you're just constantly yelling at your opponent, the TO can be like, cut it off, man. But I don't know if that's something that necessarily needs to go on a permanent record that hangs out with you forever. That also, or I guess I don't think it's something that should go on a permanent record that treats it the same as you actively cheating, right? What if TOs don't know about this thing and don't follow it? So it requires, if you missed the early part, it requires that the tournament circuit register. So there is I had to move my viewer for this one because it's too wide. There is a list of organizations that have registered and that you can submit reports from. So if you're not listed in this event list, you can't submit reports from those events, right? So I'm not gonna like show up at LVO and be like, I played somebody I didn't like, so I'm gonna submit them onto the Fair Play 40K system, because if LVO is not registered, then who cares? It doesn't matter, right? It only these organizations are the ones that are actually following the system. So it's not universal. The goal is for it to, I guess, I imagine, is it for it to become universal, or at least more widespread among circuits, but yeah. A system lets them keep track of some problematic players is a good idea. I agree with that. That is, I believe, the crux of the issue. And I think that this is a first step in that direction. I think that there's definitely some growing pains for it to go through before it's at a point where I think people would be much more comfortable with it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the first step in the road. I do think that to some extent, like, the players accusing players isn't always, the most accurate thing. But again, like, if it's something where a TO can receive a report from a player and then like accept that report, and then that gets listed for other TOs to take advantage of, I think that that's definitely something I'm in favor of. The system should have users submit reports to TOs and the TOs submit them to become permanent. That's what I would like. 100%. Don't know why there has to be a point system to begin with. I also agree with that. I think the point system kind of trivializes it a little bit too. It's kind of the thing. Magic the Gathering went through this at one point, right? Where you got like you had a certain number of cards before you received like permanent reprimand or you got banned from events or kicked out of events, and players started to consider it to be like a resource mechanic, right? And I think that ends up, if you assign points to things, I think that ends up being the case, right? Like if all I have to do to never get banned is never have any of my reports be verified, then I know exactly what I have to do in order to not be banned at any point, right? If the requirement is that a TO physically sees me cheating in every case, then I know what I have to do to dodge a ban. I'm only ever going to get 6 points. So I don't know. It speaks poorly of the MTG community. Yeah, I think that was ages ago. I can't. I mean, I'm sure you can. There's coverage on it somewhere online. I think that was like 10 and 12 years ago. I think that was the whole system was overhauled to become like basically harsher in order to prevent cheating. But it was like a card system, right? It was like you could accrue a certain number of yellow cards before you got a red card. So you're like, well, if it was 3 yellow cards to get a red card, then I have 2 yellow cards to play with, essentially. And I think that all you have to do in that case is give the judge more sort of active adjudication in those cases instead of restricting them to a card system. Just be like, hey, you're fucking clearly cheating. Get out of here. But I think it's always a small number of players who engage in that kind of behavior, and it does unfortunately reflect poorly on the community. Use weighted dice only in the finals, so you get the best bang for your buck. Yeah. A gossip Discord would work fine. I don't know if have you been on the internet before? I think that's exactly what they're trying to avoid. Or that's what I would like to avoid, I guess. This does feel a little bit like a gossip Discord in some cases. But that's the point at which you get people who are unaffiliated with the game who start to submit reports. And I do like the idea that like only people who play in the game can submit a report. Otherwise, you get a lot of like, people who just like to throw accusations around, the keyboard warriors who get involved. Anyway, chat. That's the fair play 40K system. How do we feel about it? How are we looking? I think to some extent it feels a little over designed. I think it feels like it's trying to very in a very complex way solve something that's kind of sort of relatively I don't know. That's relatively simple to tackle. And I do think that having some way to, assign records to players is good. But again, I think I would prefer that comes from a tournament organizer, not necessarily an opponent who they might have had a bad game with. The people who watch a stream and ensure that the event winner cheated. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's so much of that, right? Somebody told me recently, I'm not gonna say who, but somebody was like, I can't believe the Hellbrute guy from LSO played in World Championships. He got a golden ticket from LSO and then played in World Championships. And I said, what? That super did not happen. He did not even go undefeated at LSO. I think he went 5-1, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I forget. It was a while ago. But he didn't win LSO, right? We streamed the finals game and he wasn't in it. He didn't get a golden ticket, and he also didn't. I don't think he had a golden ticket at all, and he didn't play in Worlds. What are you talking about? And that's the kind of like narrative where that gets pushed online, and then people get upset about it. That I would be worried about having permanent repercussions on people. Like that's just wrong. It's just not correct. And if you allow people who are unaffiliated with the game in particular to have a weigh in any way, then you start to get that. And that's what that's why we don't need like a gossip Discord. We need something that's a little bit more official. Make narrative great again. So anyway, chat. That's the thing. That's the thing that's happening. Hopefully they go through some iterations here. It does seem like it's going to be relatively localized. I would sort of prefer to see this kind of system be something that gets implemented by, like the event hosting websites and stuff. But I guess they probably don't want to get involved in that. That's probably a lot of liability. But there needs to be like a third party above, like, game circuits, right? The tournament circuits that can unify more groups of people together in order to like retain these reports. I do think that the report system probably needs some work though. So anyway, it was integrated into BCP, yeah. And they talked about like, we want to integrate into BCP down the road. I think that probably means that you like ran it by BCP and they said, "Hey, cool, man," and then we're not interested right now in moving forward with this at the time being. Yeah, so I guess it does need to start somewhere, and I think this is a start. So for that I applaud them for sure, and I do think it's done with positive intentions as well. I don't. There are some people who are like accusing the organizers of this system for like trying to use it for their own ends or something like that. And it doesn't seem to me like that. It seems like it's done with the right intention. The best of intentions, even if it's maybe not implemented in 100% the greatest way. Feels like something where they would need to build the technology for it first and then present it to the community. Yeah. I'm curious as to how it, like, what the tracking is, because I have a suspicion that it is a set of Google documents, which I don't. If you're trying to expand it to something that's larger, I don't know if that's necessarily scalable, right? And especially if you have these like you're like you have points that are being tracked and you have something like things that are supposed to decay, and if you're doing that all on like an Excel sheet, like, oh, I don't know, that feels really easy to mess up and also a little bit unprofessional, I guess. Part of the way that it feels a little over designed, right? Like it has all of these different levels of infraction and different points values and then points decay and stuff like that. And if you're trying to track that all sort of semi-manually, like, oh boy, I don't even know. Yeah, hopefully it is not Google Documents. Yeah, having a Google form, I guess, is all right. I'd probably prefer it to be something a little. I guess Google Forms or whatever. But yeah, something where it generates like some sort of report that you can give to a tournament organizer feels like something that we wanted to be doing. Make a gossip Discord that's a Discord for trained people. That's interesting. Well, how do you get trained? There isn't, like, to be clear, Chan, there isn't like a requirement to be a tournament organizer. The requirement to be a tournament organizer is that you organize a tournament. You don't have to do any classes or anything. But generally speaking, I think like the people who do tournament organization do it because they like it a lot, because you don't make any money. You spend money typically. Most tournaments lose, at least for the first 2 to 3 years running, lose money, and sometimes enormous amounts of money. So these are people who are like, these are people who are they just do it because they like the job, right? Because they like the thing. They like the experience. TOs are the ones hosting tournaments, and therefore are the ones we can appeal to for decisions regarding who cannot play. Right. But I don't think that a constructive forum for that decision is a Discord where you talk shit about the players, right? I think that having a report system that only you, the TO who is responsible for that one event, right, can interact with, I think is much more reasonable than it being an open forum for like random people, for largely random people to weigh in on. I don't understand how that's constructive at all. Anyway, I think that this is a very silly argument that everyone's having in chat. But I don't know. I think the heart's in the right place. Maybe just not the system that they've designed so far. So anyway, let's go ahead and wrap up. Thanks everyone for hanging out with me today. I'm going to be live. I don't know if I have anything scheduled for the remainder of the week. But I will be back obviously next week with regularly scheduled shows. I also have upcoming the standoff event, which is going to be the weekend after this coming weekend. So that should be fun. And then I will also be, theoretically, I'll have an event a couple weeks after that. We have to hash out the details for that one. But I'll be able to show off all my new streaming stuff. Hopefully it goes well, and I'm crossing my fingers. I got to put that together this weekend and run it through its paces over the coming week. So that's going to be exciting for me. But otherwise, I should have a video out probably tomorrow. It might be out this weekend. I don't know. I've been the World Championship coverage kind of threw me off. So I'm a little bit, my normal content schedule is a little bit messed up. Not to mention all the Ultraman stuff that we played with yesterday. But I have a video that's like mostly edited. That's going to be rules talking about fast dice rolling, which is probably the most misplayed rule in 40K. In addition, I might do a video about the Space Marine stuff. I don't know. I think there was an interesting discussion happening in the stream we had yesterday where, I don't know, it's an interesting community flashpoint between Space Marine stuff. We might talk about it. In any case, thanks for hanging out with me today for this Warhamster Wednesday. And we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thanks everyone for hanging out. Keep it classy, folks. Have happy wargaming, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, everybody.